The smell of fresh coffee and apple pie filled the air at Tony's diner as the evening crowd settled in for dinner. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, where the waitresses remembered how you liked your eggs, and where strangers were treated like old friends. The red vinyl booths had seen better days, but they were comfortable and welcoming. Outside, the streetlights were just starting to flicker on as the sun began to set. In the corner booth by the window, 16-year-old Katie carefully lifted her water glass with both hands, taking a small sip before setting it back down. Her mom, Beth, watched with the quiet pride that comes from seeing your child navigate everyday tasks that others might take for granted. Katie had cerebral palsy, which affected her movement and speech, but her bright eyes sparkled with intelligence and humor that drew people to her. "The meatloaf smells really good tonight," Katie said, her words coming out slowly but clearly. She had been working hard in speech therapy, and Beth could hear the progress in every sentence. "It does," Beth agreed, reaching across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Should we get our usual?" This was their tradition. Every Friday evening after Katie's physical therapy session at the medical center across town, they would stop at Tony's diner. It had started 3 years ago when Katie was exhausted after a particularly tough therapy session and asked if they could just sit somewhere quiet for a while. Tony himself had come over to their table that first night, chatting with Katie about her favorite subjects in school and making sure she felt comfortable. The diner had become their safe place. A spot where Katie didn't have to worry about stares or whispered comments, where the staff treated her with the same friendly respect they showed everyone else, where she could just be a regular teenager enjoying dinner with her mom. Beth looked around the familiar space. Old Mr. Peterson was reading his newspaper in his usual spot at the counter, occasionally chatting with Rose, the waitress who had been working there since Katie was small. A young couple shared a milkshake in the booth across from them, laughing quietly together. Near the kitchen, a family with 2 little kids was trying to convince their toddler that green beans were actually delicious. "Mom, look," Katie pointed toward the window where a small cat was rubbing against the glass. "It's the orange one again," Beth smiled. Katie had named all the stray cats that wandered around the diner's back alley. This one was called Ginger, and Katie always asked Tony to save any leftover meat scraps for her. It was typical of her daughter to notice and care for creatures that others might overlook. The peaceful atmosphere was interrupted when the front door swung open with more force than necessary. 3 teenage boys walked in, their voices loud and their movements aggressive. They looked to be around Katie's age, probably from the local high school, but Beth didn't recognize them. Their clothes were expensive, and they carried themselves with the kind of confidence that often came from never being told no. Rose approached them with menus, but they brushed past her without acknowledgement, choosing a table in the center of the diner. Their conversation was peppered with crude language that made several diners look up from their meals with disapproval. "Can you believe they make us come to this dump for community service?" one of them said loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. "At least it's only for 2 weeks," another replied, kicking at his chair. "My dad says after that, this whole thing goes away." Beth felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She had developed an instinct over the years for sensing when trouble might be headed their way. These boys had that particular brand of arrogance that often translated into cruelty toward anyone they perceived as different or vulnerable. Katie was focused on her menu, unaware of the shift in the room's energy. She was debating between the chicken strips and the grilled cheese, a decision she took seriously every Friday, even though she usually ended up with the same thing. The boys were getting louder, making jokes that were clearly intended to be overheard. Their comments grew more inappropriate, causing the young couple with the milkshake to ask for their check early. Mr. Peterson rustled his newspaper with annoyance, but like most of the other diners, he kept his eyes down and tried to ignore them. Rose approached their table again, this time with a forced smile and obvious reluctance. "What can I get you boys tonight?" "We're still looking," the apparent leader of the group said dismissively. "And maybe we want a different table. This one's too close to that." Beth's blood ran cold as she realized he was looking directly at Katie, who was still innocently studying her menu. The way he said that made it clear he was referring to her daughter's walker, which was folded neatly beside their booth. "Excuse me?" Rose said, her voice sharp. "Nothing," the boy replied with a smirk. "Just thinking out loud." Katie looked up then, sensing the tension even if she hadn't heard the comment. Her eyes found her mother's, and Beth saw the flicker of uncertainty there. Katie had learned to read social situations carefully, a skill that came from years of navigating a world that wasn't always kind to people with disabilities. "It's okay, sweetheart," Beth said softly, but she could feel her protective instincts kicking in. She had fought too many battles over the years to let anyone make her daughter feel unwelcome or ashamed. The boys were whispering now, glancing in their direction and snickering. Other diners were starting to notice, but the familiar pattern was playing out. People would look, feel uncomfortable, maybe even feel bad for Katie and Beth, but ultimately they would mind their own business. It was easier that way. Tony emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. He had owned this place for 25 years and had seen every type of customer imaginable. His eyes swept the room, taking in the tense atmosphere, the uncomfortable diners, and the three boys who were clearly the source of the problem. "Everything all right out here, Rose?" he asked, his voice carrying just a hint of warning. "Just fine, Tony," Rose replied, but her tight smile suggested otherwise. Katie reached for her water glass again, her movements careful and deliberate. Beth watched her daughter with a mixture of admiration and heartbreak. Katie had learned to carry herself with dignity in situations like this, but Beth knew how much emotional energy it took, how exhausting it was to constantly prove your right to exist in public spaces. The boys were getting bolder now, their whispered comments becoming more audible. Beth could feel the familiar fire building in her chest, the mama bear instinct that had carried her through 16 years of fighting for her daughter's rights and dignity. Outside, the streetlights had fully illuminated the parking lot, and the dinner crowd was starting to thin out. But inside Tony's diner, the tension was building toward something that would change this quiet Friday evening forever. The whispers from the three boys grew louder, and their glances toward Katie became more obvious. Beth could feel her daughter's discomfort growing as she noticed the attention. Katie's hand started to fidget with her napkin, a nervous habit she'd developed over the years when she felt people staring. "Mom, maybe we should just get our food to go," Katie said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Beth's heart broke a little. This was their special place, their Friday tradition, and these boys were ruining it. But she also knew that sometimes discretion was the better part of valor, especially when it came to protecting Katie from unnecessary stress. "If that's what you want." "Honey," Beth said, starting to signal Rose for their check. But before Rose could notice, one of the boys stood up from his table. He was tall and lanky with perfectly styled hair, and the kind of smug expression that came from never facing real consequences. His friends watched him with anticipation like they were expecting some kind of show. "Hey," he called out, his voice cutting through the diner's ambient noise. "Are you going to order something, or are you just going to sit there taking up space?" The entire diner seemed to pause. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the little kids at the family table turned to look. Beth felt every eye in the place on them, and she could see Katie shrinking into herself. "We're customers here, just like you," Beth replied evenly, though her voice carried a warning edge that any parent would recognize. "Doesn't look like you're eating much," the boy continued, emboldened by his friend's snickering. "Maybe you should make room for people who actually want to be here." Tony appeared from behind the counter, his face serious. "That's enough," he said firmly. "Everyone's welcome in my restaurant as long as they're respectful." The boy looked Tony up and down with obvious disdain. "We're not doing anything wrong. Just making conversation." "Find another conversation," Tony replied. But the boy had already turned his attention back to Katie and Beth. Katie was trying to become invisible, her shoulders hunched and her eyes fixed on her untouched glass of water. Beth recognized the signs. Her daughter was about to have what they called a shutdown, when the stress and anxiety became too much and she needed to retreat somewhere safe and quiet. "I think we should go," Katie whispered, starting to reach for her walker. As she began to stand, using the table for support while reaching for her mobility aid, the boy took a step closer. "Yeah, maybe you should," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This isn't really the place for people like you." The silence that followed was deafening. Beth felt her face flush with anger, but before she could respond, Katie was trying to maneuver out of the booth. The process always took her a few moments. She had to be careful and deliberate with her movements. That's when the boy made his move. As Katie was stepping around her walker, trying to position it properly, He deliberately stuck his foot out. Not obviously enough that it would look intentional to casual observers, but clearly enough that Katie caught her foot on his shoe. She stumbled forward, her hands grabbing desperately for something to steady herself. The walker skittered away and Katie went down hard, landing on her knees on the diner's worn linoleum floor. The sound of her fall seemed to echo through the silent restaurant. Beth was out of the booth instantly, rushing to her daughter's side. "Katie, are you okay? Are you hurt?" But as Beth knelt beside her daughter, the boy stepped closer instead of backing away. "Oops," he said with mock concern. "Guess you should watch where you're going. You did that on purpose," Beth said, her voice rising as she helped Katie sit up. She could see tears in her daughter's eyes, though Katie was trying hard not to cry. "Did what?" "I was just standing here," the boy replied with an innocent shrug that fooled no one. Beth was trying to help Katie to her feet when she felt a hard shove against her shoulder. She stumbled sideways, losing her grip on Katie, who fell again with a small cry of pain. "Get out of the way," the boy said. "You're blocking the whole aisle." The shove had been deliberate and mean-spirited, designed to humiliate rather than simply move Beth aside. She caught herself against an empty table, her mind reeling from the audacity of what had just happened. Katie was on the floor again, and this time the tears came. Not just from physical pain, though. Beth could see she'd scraped her knee, but from the crushing embarrassment of being targeted and humiliated in front of a room full of strangers. "Please," Katie whispered, her voice breaking. "I just want to go home." Beth's protective instincts kicked into overdrive. She positioned herself between her daughter and the boy, her eyes blazing with maternal fury. "Stay away from her," she said, her voice low and dangerous. The boy just laughed. "What are you going to do about it?" Around them, the other diners sat frozen. Beth could see the discomfort on their faces, the way they looked down at their plates or found sudden interest in their phones. A few people looked genuinely upset, but no one moved to help. The young couple who'd been sharing a milkshake had already left. Mr. Peterson was still at his counter stool, but he was staring straight ahead, pretending not to see what was happening right behind him. Even Rose seemed paralyzed, standing near the kitchen with wide eyes and an order pad clutched in her shaking hands. She was barely 18 herself, working her way through community college, and had no idea how to handle a situation like this. Tony was moving toward them, his face dark with anger, but he was on the other side of the restaurant and would need several more seconds to reach them. Katie was trying to pull herself up, using a nearby chair for support, when the boy's friend decided to join in. "Maybe they should put up a sign," he said loudly, warning people about the obstacles. The third boy, who had been quiet until now, seemed uncomfortable with how far things had gone. "Guys, maybe we should just what?" The leader snapped at his friend. "They're the ones making a scene." Katie finally managed to stand, her legs shaking and her face red with humiliation. Beth could see that her daughter's knee was bleeding through her jeans, and there were angry red marks on her palms from catching herself on the rough floor. "We're leaving," Beth said firmly, reaching for Katie's walker and helping her daughter steady herself. "Good," the boy replied. "Maybe next time pick a place that's more suitable." The cruelty in his voice, the casual way he dismissed her daughter's humanity, sent Beth's anger to a boiling point. But Katie's small hand on her arm held her back. "Mom, please," Katie whispered. "Let's just go." As they made their slow progress toward the door, Katie leaning heavily on her walker and trying not to show how much she was hurting, Beth could feel every eye in the place on them. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of Katie's walker on the floor and the quiet snickering from the three boys. Tony finally reached them as they approached the door. "Katie, Beth, I'm so sorry." "This isn't—" "It's not your fault, Tony," Beth said quietly, though her voice was thick with emotion. Outside, the cool evening air hit their faces as they emerged from the diner. Beth could see Katie was fighting back tears, trying to maintain her dignity even as her world felt like it was crashing down around her. That's when they heard the sound of motorcycle engines rumbling into the parking lot. The rumble of motorcycle engines filled the evening air, growing louder as several bikes pulled into Tony's diner parking lot. Beth instinctively moved closer to Katie, who was still shaking from what had just happened inside. The sound of the powerful engines seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath their feet. Katie looked up at her mother with worried eyes. "Mom, maybe we should get in the car." Beth glanced toward their vehicle parked on the far side of the lot. It would mean walking past the motorcycles, and right now, Katie was already overwhelmed and hurting. The scrape on her knee was still bleeding, and Beth could see her daughter was fighting to hold back tears. "It's okay, sweetheart," Beth said softly, though she wasn't entirely sure herself. "Let's just wait a moment." 6 motorcycles lined up near the diner's entrance, their chrome gleaming under the parking lot lights. The engines shut off one by one, and the sudden quiet felt almost as intimidating as the noise had been. Beth could hear voices and laughter coming from inside the diner. The 3 boys were still enjoying themselves, probably thinking they'd won some kind of victory. The first rider swung his leg over his bike and pulled off his helmet. He was older than Beth had expected, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and weathered hands that spoke of years of hard work. His leather jacket had patches on it, and Beth could make out some kind of club logo, though she couldn't read it clearly in the dim light. One by one, the other riders dismounted. They were a mixed group, men and women of various ages, all wearing similar leather jackets. Contrary to what Beth might have expected, they moved with quiet confidence rather than aggressive swagger. Their voices were low and respectful as they talked among themselves. The older man who'd been first to get off his bike seemed to be their leader. He looked around the parking lot, his eyes taking in every detail. When his gaze fell on Beth and Katie standing near the diner's entrance, his expression grew concerned. "Evening," he said with a polite nod. "You folks all right?" Katie looked up at him with curiosity rather than fear. Despite his intimidating appearance, there was something gentle in his eyes that reminded her of her grandfather. "We're okay," Beth replied cautiously. "Just had a difficult evening." The man's eyes moved to Katie's scraped knee and the tears she was still trying to wipe away. His jaw tightened slightly, and Beth saw him exchange a look with one of the other riders, a woman with short gray hair and kind eyes. "Trouble inside?" the woman asked, stepping closer. She had a warm voice that immediately put Katie at ease. "Some teenagers," Beth said simply, not wanting to go into details. "We were just leaving." Through the diner's windows, they could see the 3 boys who had caused the trouble. They had noticed the motorcycles arriving and were now pressed against the glass, pointing and laughing. One of them was making exaggerated gestures, clearly entertained by what he thought was about to be an interesting show. The lead biker followed Beth's gaze toward the windows. "Those boys giving you trouble?" Katie looked up at him, then at her mother. She was usually shy around strangers, but something about this man's gentle tone made her feel safe enough to speak. "They made me fall," she said quietly. "On purpose." The temperature in the parking lot seemed to drop several degrees. The bikers exchanged glances, and Beth could see their relaxed demeanor shift into something more serious. But it wasn't the kind of anger she had feared. It was the controlled, purposeful anger of people who had seen too much cruelty in the world. "I see," the older man said, his voice still calm but carrying a new edge. "And the folks inside just let that happen?" Beth nodded, feeling a mixture of shame and frustration. "Everyone saw it, but no one wanted to get involved?" The woman biker knelt down to Katie's level, her movements gentle and unthreatening. "Honey, are you hurt anywhere besides that knee?" Katie shook her head, then looked down at her hands, which were still red from catching herself when she fell. "Just embarrassed," she whispered. "You have nothing to be embarrassed about," the woman said firmly. "Nothing at all." Inside the diner, the 3 boys had grown bolder. They were now standing at the window, making faces and gestures at the bikers. One of them even pressed his face against the glass, clearly thinking this was all some kind of joke. The other diners inside looked uncomfortable, but they were still keeping their distance from the troublemakers. Tony appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Beth, Katie, I'm so sorry about what happened. Those boys, I've already called their parents and—" "Don't worry about it, Tony," the lead biker said, stepping forward. "We'll handle this." Tony looked nervous for the first time since Beth had known him. "Listen, I don't want any trouble in my place. These are good people." He gestured toward Beth and Katie. "And they didn't deserve what happened, but—" "We're not here to cause trouble," the older man said calmly. "We're here to prevent it." One of the other bikers, a younger man with tattooed arms and a serious expression, was watching the boys through the window. "Looks like they think this is funny," he observed. "They won't think it's funny much longer," another rider added grimly. Inside the diner, the boys were getting more animated. The leader of their group had apparently decided that the arrival of the bikers was the perfect opportunity to show off even more. He was gesturing wildly, probably telling his friends how he wasn't afraid of anyone. Katie tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom, what if they hurt those boys?" Beth looked down at her daughter with surprise. Even after what had been done to her, Katie was worried about her tormentors getting hurt. It was so typical of her daughter's kind heart, but it also made Beth's own anger burn even hotter. The lead biker overheard Katie's question. He turned to her with a reassuring smile. "Sweetheart, we don't hurt people. That's not what we're about." "Then what are you about?" Katie asked innocently. "We're about making sure people treat each other right," he replied. "And when they don't, we help them remember how they should." The woman biker stood up from where she had been examining Katie's scrape. "This needs to be cleaned," she said to Beth. "Do you have a first aid kit in your car?" "I do, but I'll get it," one of the younger bikers offered. "What kind of car?" As Beth pointed out their vehicle, she realized something surprising was happening. These intimidating-looking strangers were taking care of her and Katie with the kind of natural kindness she hadn't seen from any of the respectable diners inside. The boys in the window were still putting on their show, apparently convinced that they were about to witness some kind of confrontation that would make them look tough by association. They had no idea that their evening was about to take a very different turn than they expected. The lead biker looked at his group, then back toward the diner windows where the three troublemakers were still making a spectacle of themselves. "All right, folks," he said quietly to his fellow riders, "let's go have a conversation." As they started walking toward the diner entrance, Beth felt Katie's hand slip into hers. Together, they watched as 6 leather-clad figures approached the door, moving with purpose and quiet determination. The boys inside had no idea what was coming. The diner door opened with a soft chime, but the sound seemed to echo through the suddenly silent restaurant. The 6 bikers filed in quietly, their heavy boots barely making a sound on the worn linoleum floor. The lead rider paused just inside the entrance, his eyes scanning the room with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read situations quickly. The 3 boys who had been so bold just moments before suddenly looked much smaller. The leader, who had been pressing his face against the window and making gestures, quickly stepped back from the glass and tried to blend in with his friends. Their earlier laughter died completely as they realized the bikers weren't just passing through. Every other conversation in the diner had stopped. Mr. Peterson finally looked up from his newspaper, his eyes wide behind his thick glasses. The family with young children gathered their kids closer to them, though the children seemed more curious than afraid. Rose stood frozen near the coffee machine, her pot still in her hand. The older biker moved with calm confidence toward the center of the restaurant. He didn't head straight for the boys' table, but instead took a moment to look around at all the other diners. His gaze lingered on each face, and Beth could see through the window that he was making mental notes of who was there and how they were reacting. "Good evening, folks," he said in a voice that carried clearly through the quiet space. "Sorry to interrupt your dinner." His tone was polite, almost gentle, but there was something in it that commanded respect. The younger bikers spread out slightly behind him, not in a threatening way, but so they could see the entire restaurant. The woman biker with gray hair took a position near the counter where she could see both the boys and the kitchen. "We just had a conversation outside with a young lady and her mother," the lead biker continued, his voice still calm and conversational. "Seems there was some trouble in here earlier." The 3 boys exchanged nervous glances. Their leader tried to put on a brave face, but Beth could see his hands shaking slightly as he reached for his water glass. One of the other bikers, a man with kind eyes and graying temples, spoke up. "The thing is, we don't like it when people pick on folks who can't defend themselves." The boys' table had gone completely silent. Around them, other diners were starting to pay closer attention, realizing this wasn't going to be the kind of confrontation they had feared. The lead biker pulled out a chair from an empty table and sat down, making himself comfortable. The gesture somehow made him seem more approachable but also more serious. When someone takes the time to sit down, it usually means they're planning to stay until they get what they came for. "Now, I don't know you boys," he said, looking directly at their table, "but I'm guessing you come from good families. Probably got parents who taught you right from wrong." The leader of the boys tried to speak up. We didn't do anything wrong. We were just, son, the biker interrupted gently. I wasn't talking to you yet. The simple correction, delivered without anger but with absolute authority, silenced the boy immediately. Beth watched through the window, amazed at how the dynamic in the room had completely shifted. See, the thing is, the older man continued, we've got some experience with bullying. Most of us in this room have seen it, and some of us have lived through it. One of the younger bikers, a woman with intricate tattoos covering her arms, stepped forward slightly. I spent 3 years getting picked on in school because I walked funny after a car accident, she said quietly. Had kids trip me in the hallways, call me names, make me feel like I didn't belong anywhere. The family with young children was listening intently now. Even the toddler had stopped fussing and was staring at the woman with wide eyes. The difference is, she continued, back then, nobody stood up for me. Adults looked the other way. Other kids pretended not to see. And I went home crying pretty much every day for 3 years. Another biker, this one with silver hair and gentle eyes, spoke up from near the counter. My little brother had autism. Couldn't talk the way other kids did. Couldn't understand social situations. But he was the sweetest kid you'd ever meet. Loved everyone, trusted everyone. His voice grew quieter and the entire diner leaned in to hear him. Kids at school used to trick him, make fun of him, sometimes even hurt him. And you know what the adults said? Boys will be boys. Kids are just being kids. Like cruelty was some kind of natural part of growing up. The 3 boys at their table looked increasingly uncomfortable. The leader's earlier bravado had completely disappeared and he was staring down at his hands. But here's what we learned, the lead biker said, his voice still calm but carrying more weight now. Cruelty isn't natural. Kindness is. Most people want to do the right thing, but sometimes they need a reminder of what that looks like. Rose finally found her voice. Can I get you folks anything? Coffee? That's very kind of you, miss, the older man replied with a genuine smile. But we're not staying long. Just wanted to have a conversation. He turned his attention back to the boys' table. Now I understand there was some trouble with a young lady who uses a walker. Someone made her fall, then made her fall again when her mother tried to help. The silence in the diner was complete now. Even the family's toddler had gone quiet, somehow sensing the importance of what was happening. The thing about people with disabilities, said another biker, this one a man who looked like he might have been a teacher or coach in another life, is that they're usually stronger than the rest of us. They deal with challenges every day that would break most people. They show more courage getting through an ordinary day than most of us show in a year. So when someone picks on a person like that, the woman with tattoos added, they're not picking on someone weak. They're picking on someone who's probably 10 times tougher than they are. The lead biker stood up slowly, his movement deliberate and controlled. Now, I'm not here to threaten anybody or cause trouble. That's not what we do. He walked closer to the boys' table but stopped a respectful distance away. What we do is simple. We remind people that their actions have consequences, that the way they treat others says everything about who they are as human beings. The leader of the 3 boys finally looked up, his face red with shame. We didn't mean, son, the biker said gently. It doesn't matter what you meant. What matters is what you did, and what you're going to do about it now. Outside, Beth and Katie were watching through the window, amazed by what they were seeing. There was no shouting, no threats, no violence. Just adults having a serious conversation with teenagers who desperately needed to hear what they were saying. The gray-haired woman biker approached the boys' table and sat down across from them. Here's what's going to happen, she said in a voice that was both kind and firm. You're going to think about what kind of men you want to become. The gray-haired woman biker looked each of the 3 boys in the eyes before continuing. You have a choice to make right now. You can double down on what you did and pretend it was no big deal. Or you can own up to it and try to make things right. The leader of the boys, who had seemed so confident just an hour earlier, was staring at his hands. His 2 friends looked equally uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and avoiding eye contact with everyone around them. What do you want us to do? The leader finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. That's not up to us, the older biker replied from where he stood. That's up to you, but I'll tell you what I think would be a good start. He gestured toward the window where Beth and Katie were still standing in the parking lot. That young lady out there was just trying to have dinner with her mom. She didn't ask for trouble, didn't deserve what happened to her. And right now she's probably wondering if she'll ever feel safe coming to places like this again. One of the other bikers, a man who had been quietly observing from near the counter, spoke up. "My daughter's about your age," he said to the boys. "And if someone treated her the way you treated that girl out there, I'd be having a very different kind of conversation with them." The weight of his words hung in the air. The boys seemed to shrink even smaller in their booth. "But here's the thing," the man continued, his voice softening slightly. "People make mistakes, even big hurtful ones. What matters is what you do after you realize you've made a mistake." Rose, who had been standing frozen near the coffee machine, finally found her courage. "Those people come in here every Friday," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Katie always asks about the stray cats, and she tips me even though she's just a kid. She's one of the kindest people I know." Around the diner, other customers were beginning to speak up for the first time all evening. "I saw what you did to her," said Mr. Peterson from his spot at the counter. "Made me sick to my stomach. That girl never hurt anybody." The young couple who had been sharing a milkshake earlier had returned and were standing near the door. "We left because we were too scared to say anything," the young man said. "But we shouldn't have. We should have stood up for her." The family with young children looked ashamed as the father spoke up. "I was worried about my own kids, didn't want them to see any trouble. But they saw worse than that. They saw adults doing nothing while someone got hurt." The boys were looking around the room now, seeing faces that had been invisible to them before. People who had witnessed their cruelty and been affected by it. People who were now finding their voices. Tony emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. "In 25 years of running this place, I've never been more disappointed in how people acted," he said. "And I include myself in that. I should have stepped in sooner." The lead biker nodded approvingly at the diner owner. "It takes courage to admit when you could have done better." The leader of the three boys took a shaky breath. Can we talk to her? To them?" "That depends," the gray-haired woman said. "Are you ready to take responsibility for what you did? Really take responsibility. Not just say sorry because you got caught?" The boy looked at his friends, then back at the bikers. "Yes, I think I need to." The older biker studied the boy's face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but understand something. This isn't about making yourself feel better. This is about acknowledging the harm you caused and figuring out how to do better." The group moved outside with the bikers leading the way, and the three boys following hesitantly behind. Other diners came too. Rose, Tony, Mr. Peterson, the young couple, even the family with children. It was as if the entire restaurant had decided they couldn't stay on the sidelines anymore. Beth saw them coming and instinctively moved closer to Katie, but the lead biker held up a gentle hand. "It's okay," he said. "These boys have something they want to say." Katie looked up at the approaching group with uncertainty. The scrape on her knee had stopped bleeding, but her eyes were still red from earlier tears. The leader of the boys stepped forward, his friends behind him. He looked scared but also determined. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm really, really sorry for what I did to you. It was cruel and wrong, and there's no excuse for it." Katie studied his face, trying to determine if he meant what he was saying. "I tripped you on purpose," he continued, tears starting to form in his eyes. "And when your mom tried to help, I pushed her. I was showing off for my friends, and I was being a horrible person." His voice broke completely now. "My little cousin has cerebral palsy just like you. She's only 8, and she's the sweetest kid in the world. If someone did to her what I did to you..." He couldn't finish the sentence. One of his friends stepped up beside him. "We all just stood there and let it happen. We're sorry, too." The third boy, who had been the most reluctant participant in their earlier cruelty, was crying openly now. "I wanted to tell them to stop, but I was too scared. I'm sorry for being such a coward." Katie looked at the three boys, then up at her mother. Beth could see her daughter processing what she was hearing, trying to decide how to respond. "Why did you do it?" Katie asked quietly. The leader of the boys wiped his eyes. "Because I'm angry all the time and I take it out on people who can't fight back. Because I thought it would make me look tough. Because I'm stupid and mean and I don't know how to be better." "But you want to be better?" Katie asked. He nodded vigorously. "Yes, I want to be the kind of person my little cousin can be proud of." The gray-haired woman biker stepped forward. "Katie, you don't have to forgive them right now. You don't have to forgive them ever. If you don't want to. They hurt you and your feelings about that are valid." Katie considered this for a moment. I don't know if I forgive you yet, she said to the boys. But I'm glad you understand why what you did was wrong. The lead biker looked at the three teenagers. Understanding is just the first step. What are you going to do to make sure this never happens again? Whatever it takes, the leader said immediately. Community service, volunteer work, whatever you think would help. That's not up to us, the older man replied. That's between you and your consciences. But I will say this, real change happens when nobody's watching. When you stand up for someone getting picked on, even when your friends think you're uncool for doing it. Rose spoke up from the group of diners. Katie, your dinner's on the house tonight, and every Friday from now on, as long as you want to keep coming here. Tony nodded in agreement. This is your place. Don't let anyone ever make you feel like it isn't. Mr. Peterson, who had spent the evening ignoring the situation, stepped forward with obvious shame. Young lady, I owe you an apology too. I saw what was happening and I did nothing. That was wrong of me. Other diners began speaking up, offering their own apologies for not intervening, for not standing up when it mattered. The parking lot filled with voices of people who had found their courage too late, but were determined not to lose it again. The bikers began walking back toward their motorcycles, their work done. The lead rider paused near Beth and Katie. You take care of yourself, sweetheart, he said to Katie. And remember, you belong anywhere you want to be. The gray-haired woman handed Beth a small card. That's got our contact information on it. If anyone ever gives you trouble again, you call us. We've got chapters all over the state, and we look out for each other. As the bikers mounted their motorcycles and rode off into the night, the parking lot remained full of people. The three boys who had caused so much pain were now committed to doing better. The diners who had stayed silent were now speaking up. And Katie, who had entered the evening feeling small and hurt, was surrounded by a community that had finally found its voice. Mom, Katie said as they finally headed back toward their car. Can we still come here on Fridays? Beth smiled, her heart full of pride for her daughter's resilience and forgiveness. As long as you want to, sweetheart. This is our place. Behind them, Tony was already taking the boys' information, setting up a plan for them to volunteer at the local disability center. The diner was buzzing with conversations about standing up for others and doing better. Sometimes it takes strangers on motorcycles to remind a community what they're supposed to stand for.